Good afternoon and welcome to the University of Toronto Mississauga's webinar on the power of positivity. My name is Yordanka, and as an UTM alumna, I'm so pleased to welcome everyone today and look forward to what is sure to be an enlightening presentation. For today's lecture, we have alumni and friends registered from all over the world, from India, Nigeria, Hong Kong, Australia, Scotland, Germany, Italy, Guyana, Singapore, Indonesia, the UK, the Netherlands, Colombia, Spain, and all across Canada and the United States. Welcome, everyone. Our session today is being pre-recorded. Following the presentation, there will be a moderated question and answer period where I will present pre-submitted questions from the audience. As I mentioned a moment ago, my name is Yordanka Garmenova. I graduated from University of Toronto Mississauga in 2014. I hold a master's degree in counseling psychology, and I'm a registered psychotherapist and a Canadian certified counselor. I've been working in private practice as a psychotherapist for the past 4 years. Today, I'm delighted to introduce our presenter, Assistant Professor of Psychology at the University of Toronto Mississauga, Jennifer Steller. As a director of the Health, Emotions, and Altruism Laboratory, Jennifer's work examines the forces that drive pro-social behaviors and morality. Living harmoniously in large-scale societies requires individuals to suppress their more selfish inclinations and prioritize the welfare of others. She investigates how a group of emotions called self-transcendent emotions promote empathy and altruism towards others, encourage cooperation and cohesion within groups, and enhance the health and well-being of the individual. Jennifer also explores how individuals encourage moral behavior and uphold moral norms through expressing moral outrage and allowing others to regain moral status through redemption. Her works aim to answer a fundamental question about humans. How do we transcend our own self-focus to care about other people, groups, and society as a whole? Thank you so much for being with us today, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to share my screen with you all here. So I'm very excited to get to chat with you today about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is the power of positive emotions. So thank you for having me. And today what I want to do is to talk to you about a subset of positive emotions called self-transcendent emotions, as Yordanka mentioned, which help us focus a little bit less on ourselves and a little bit more on others. And I'll share the surprising ways in which thinking less about ourselves can actually improve our own health and well-being. So we all want to know how to live happy, healthy, and resilient lives. And certainly the pandemic hasn't made it easy, and it's introduced a lot of new challenges in how we might be able to best flourish. But I'm hoping today to give you some data-driven advice on what you can do to promote health and happiness and resilience in your own life. Now, despite the importance of well-being, it's only recently become a focus within psychology, or even I'd argue within our own society. So for a long time, psychology used what we call a disease model approach. And by this, I mean that we focus on understanding what is wrong or bad with people. And you may even find this reflected in your own lives, where you run around putting out fires, rather than thinking proactively about how you can be happier and healthier and more resilient. Now, I don't want to knock the disease model approach within psychology, because it has been really important for allowing us to understand treatments for illness, to make people who are unhappy less unhappy. But the whole complexity of human experience can't be simply understood by looking for what's wrong or bad with people. And in some ways, psychology for a long time forgot about improving regular people's lives. And so in the last few decades, along came a movement called positive psychology. And we think about this as the scientific study of what enables individuals and communities to thrive. So the idea of this approach is that we want to understand what's right and good with people so that we can help teach other people. And so psychology should be as concerned with strength as it is with weakness, as interested in building the best things in life as repairing the worst, and as concerned with making the lives of normal people happier as improving the lives of people who are struggling. And I think this idea is moving out of psychology and hopefully into the popular mindset of society. so that you all are starting to consider more and more what makes you happy and healthy and resilient. Now, one of the big questions in positive psychology that I won't have time to go into fully today is, what is happiness, right? So in order to pursue happiness, we need to know what it means. And I'll briefly just mention a simple answer to this very complicated question, which is a prominent perspective that actually comes all the way back from Aristotle, who argued that there are two components. One is being happy in life. In this case, you can think about happiness as maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain. But a second component is meaning and purpose. And you can get this from family, from friendships, from career, maybe living a life that you feel is moral and good, or finding a career that you're passionate about. And meaning can help you attain longer term life satisfaction. And so together with being happy and finding meaning and purpose, these are the elements that really help us thrive and flourish. And positive emotions are a key part of both being happy and finding meaning and purpose. And despite receiving less study than negative emotions, positive emotions are now starting to get their due attention. And this is in part thanks to the positive psychology movement. And we all know that we have lots of different positive emotions. We can feel pride, contentment, enthusiasm, amusement, and all of these are really important for our well-being. And these emotions that I mentioned really fit well within our goals, many of which are part of positive psychology, to promote happiness and health and resiliency. And they do this by helping us cultivate our self-worth and self-esteem, increasing our self-knowledge and our wisdom, and encouraging us to fulfill our talents and live up to our potential, which sometimes we call self-actualization. But I want to make a point about these goals, which is that although positive emotions generally are very important, especially the ones I mentioned, it does also reflect in their study a bias towards focusing inward. You'll notice the word self in a lot of the different phenomenon that I just mentioned. We're thinking here about what I want, how am I doing in life, what do I need? And these emotions, many of which I mentioned, often prioritize looking inward towards the self to promote greater well-being. And this, I believe, isn't the whole story. In fact, I think that there are many benefits to a reduced self-focus. So perhaps focusing our attention outward, away from the self, at least sometimes, and that this might offer another pathway for generating happiness, health, resilience, well-being. And so you might have noticed in this picture I just showed you that there were some gaps, and these gaps represent some positive emotions that we've studied a lot less in social psychology, especially positive psychology. Emotions like love and awe and gratitude and compassion. And these are the emotions I'm really interested in studying. And I think that by understanding these emotions, we'll be able to get a fuller picture on how positive emotions can promote happiness, health, and resilience. I'm not the first to make an argument that these emotions are important. They're at the heart of some phenomenon that we really care about in psychology, things like mindfulness or flow, feeling like you're in the moment, losing track of time, and pro-social behavior, pro-sociality, so caring about others. And so today, I'm going to take you on a short journey to look at this exciting group of positive emotions that I think are really important. And these emotions bind us to other people. They make us, as I said, focus less on what we need and more on what others need. And by doing this, they can help us transcend beyond our own selfish desires to care about other people, which is sometimes why you'll hear them referred to, especially here, as self-transcendent emotions. Now, it might be counterintuitive, as I said, to think that emotions that focus the attention away from ourselves would actually lead to direct benefits for the self in terms of health and well-being. But I'm going to show you that this is the case and that these emotions might have a particularly strong relationship to our health and well-being. Now, of course, I can't go into all of these emotions, so I'm going to focus on three in particular. I'll go through some of the research that we know is happening, very ongoing cutting edge research on awe, on compassion, and on gratitude. So the talk will have three parts today, and we'll focus on each part on one emotion specifically. So I wanted to start with awe, and many of you might be wondering, what is awe? I don't use this term in my daily life, so I want to give you a definition that we use. We think about awe as an emotion that occurs in response to an object or maybe a person with such extraordinary qualities, it defies comprehension. And you can see the picture here I have in the background is a very small person looking out over a giant vista. That's the kind of experience that many people would say would elicit this emotion of awe in them. And awe is an emotion that we often feel when we see something that's vast and grand. So on the left here, you can see a picture that I actually took when I was in Kings Canyon National Park in California of the giant sequoia trees. The people are so small you can't even see them at the bottom, but this idea of seeing something that's large, either physically large or maybe in number, or maybe in complexity, is one of the components of feeling awe. And also this sense of having your mind blown. It's hard to understand what you're seeing because it's so much beyond the norm of what you encounter that it makes you have to rethink how you see the world. And this might be something like the most beautiful sunset that you've seen in a long time. Now, you may think that you have to travel to remote places to experience awe, but I do want to say that that's not true. It turns out that people report feeling awe around twice a week on average, making it a more common emotion than you might expect. And we've done what we call daily diary studies to understand what people are feeling when they experience awe in their daily lives. And I just want to read you two examples that we've gotten from some students in our studies. So here's one. Today I learned that there's no distinct center to the universe and that the center of the universe could be another dimension. I was in Wheeler Auditorium during my astronomy lecture, and this piece of information blew my mind. It opens up so many possibilities for the realm of physics that I can't even fathom. Another person wrote, my most awe-inducing moment was looking out of my window during the sunset and seeing the Golden Gate Bridge surrounded by the sky that was a mixture of orange, yellow, blue. It was really beautiful, and I just stared at it for a couple of minutes. I felt really calm and relaxed, and it was a good break from what I was doing. So we all have different experiences that make us feel awe, and I'd encourage you to think about what it is that makes you feel awe. Some people find it in nature. Some people find it from other people that are awe-inspiring. For others, it can come from art and music, religion and spirituality, and there are all sorts of other ways that you might feel awe, or maybe you feel them in many of these different distinct types of contexts. For me, I know nature is a big promoter of awe, so this is a picture of a sunset that I took over Toronto on the left side, and a hike that I went on when I traveled with my partner to Chile. And so being out in nature is one way for me to experience awe. Now, from recent work, we know that awe, or at least feeling awe, helps us feel more humble, and it makes us feel more satisfied with our lives. So promotes well-being through a sense of feeling like your life is going well. Today, I want to share just one study from my own lab about how awe can help keep us healthy. So I'm going to focus on awe in particular and its relationship to immune functioning. So in this study that I'll briefly cover, we looked at proteins that lead to inflammation. We call these proteins pro-inflammatory cytokines, but what you need to know is that in the body, they promote inflammation. And over time, it can be useful in the moment to have this response if you're injured or sick or you have an infection. But over time, if these markers of inflammation are elevated, they can hurt your health. They can contribute to diabetes and cardiovascular disease and depression. So you really don't want these markers of inflammation, these little proteins floating around your body for a long period of time. And we wanted to know in our study whether people who felt more awe and actually more positive emotions generally had less of this damaging biomarker, this inflammation marker in their body. And we thought this might be the case because some negative emotions seem to be associated with increased levels of inflammation and these markers. And so it stands to reason that positive emotions may, in their own individual right, be associated with lower levels of these markers. So to test this question, we had students come into the lab. They filled out a survey that asked them about the frequency and the intensity with which they felt 7 different positive emotions. You can see them here: joy, love, compassion, amusement, pride, contentment, and awe. And then they gave us a sample of their saliva. So thanks to modern science, we're able to relatively easily collect these samples and analyze them for these markers that are floating around of inflammation in the body. And what we found was that there were 4 specific emotions that were particularly good predictors of lower levels of this damaging biomarker: joy, pride, contentment, and awe. And I'm going to highlight awe for a moment here because, interestingly, the emotion of awe consistently showed the strongest relationship to having lower levels of these damaging proteins that promote inflammation. And in general, good news is that having more positive emotion is associated with having lower levels of these markers, but there seems to be potentially something really special about this emotion of awe for promoting better immune functioning. And we're still trying to understand why that might be the case, but it seems that potentially from promoting a sense of interconnection, reducing stress, that awe might have this really fascinating link with immune functioning and physical health more broadly. So it begs the question for all of us, are we doing enough to cultivate this emotion in our daily lives? And I wanted to follow up on that one's experiment with some data-driven suggestions. So based on my body of work looking at awe, I can tell you that we need to rethink this emotion. It's not a luxury. It might feel like going for a walk or taking time to go to a concert when we can do that again, or going on a trip feels like a luxury, but it's not. It's actually a way for you to maintain and potentially improve your health and well-being. And in that same vein, it's important to actively seek out awe. So this is a picture that I took on one of my daily walks around Toronto when it was the fall, and I love looking at the foliage, and I get this sense of awe from all of the changing colors of the leaves. So I make it a point to go out and find ways to feel awe. And third, relatedly, finding awe in the everyday. So whether that's a small walk that you can take or watching a clip of planet Earth on your computer, listening to some music that you really love, anything that makes you feel awe, you don't have to just restrict it to those big experiences traveling. You can feel it in small moments in your everyday. All right, so I want to move on to another self-transcendent emotion that's important for well-being, I'll argue, which is compassion. And we think about compassion in psychology as this emotion that represents a sorrow or concern for another person, coupled with the desire to alleviate that suffering. And compassion helps us connect to other people, which is really important for health and well-being. We also know that it can actually, moments of compassion can improve our cardiac health and functioning. But today I want to talk about how feeling compassion can actually reduce our own stress. And again, I'm going to highlight one study from our lab that looks at compassion's relationship to stress. So this is an ongoing study in our lab. I'll tell you about the first couple that we've run. We had participants fill out or write about a specific stressor. We all have something we're probably stressed about. And so participants wrote about that for just a few minutes. And then we made them feel compassion, or we elicited a neutral state with a video that was intended and we know elicits compassion or sort of a neutral, calm state. And what we found, if you look at this figure here, is you can see stress on the vertical axis. And what you can see is that the compassion video, or the compassion condition, I should say, in blue, the participants reported less stress than in the neutral condition in orange. So when you have somebody think about a stressor and then you elicit a sense of compassion in them, their stress about their own, daily stressor that might be going on, ongoing stressor, is actually lower than if you say just show them a neutral sort of calm video. And you might be wondering why this happens. We've been doing studies to follow up, and it seems like what's happening is that it shifts people's perspective on their own suffering. So if you look at this cartoon here, it gives you a new perspective on where you are in your life. And maybe it makes your current life stressors not seem so bad when you contemplate what other people are struggling with, and also take the time to shift your focus away from yourself momentarily and think about other people and what they might be needing. And so from this work, again, some data-driven advice is if you know somebody, there's many people out there, especially during this pandemic times, that might need your compassion, make a plan to reach out. So think about someone who you know who may be feeling particularly isolated because of lockdowns or just COVID generally, and who might need some help. And think to yourself, what do they need and how can I support them? And be detailed in these thoughts. And really, you can see here, these thoughts are about them and what they need, right? Your role in this situation is to be the support giver or the caretaker. And so this leads to some advice that I'll share, which is don't fear compassion. Sometimes people feel afraid of connecting to others, but that's how we bond with other people and we form and maintain our relationships. Focus on the connection and not the suffering. I get many questions from people about feeling overwhelmed by others' suffering. And so I always try and encourage them to try not to focus as much on the suffering, but on the connection and the support that you can give that person so that you don't suffer along with them, that you can actively be a support giver. And lastly, I would say beware of compassion fatigue. You do need to know your limits. Sometimes when we face suffering too repeatedly, in a way that's too ongoing, it can drain us. And so finding ways to make sure that you get breaks to take care of yourself so that you can continue to be compassionate and be that caretaker or support giver for somebody who needs you. All right, lastly, I want to talk a bit about gratitude. And you may be more familiar with this emotion. It's made it into sort of the societal awareness and out of just psychology research. But for those of you who don't have a good working definition, we typically think of gratitude as feeling thankful or appreciative for what one has or what one has been given. And gratitude typically arises out of the perception that we've received something positive that may not even necessarily be deserved or earned, but it could be, but it's due to the actions of another person. And gratitude can help promote our health. It can connect us to other people, especially in our romantic relationships or close relationships generally. But today I want to focus on its benefits for mood, which is a really important component of well-being. And I'm going to review quickly a study from another lab that looks at the relationship between gratitude and mood. So in this study, participants reported a positive and negative mood. They're going to do this 2 times across the experiment. First, right away when they arrive at the study, and then second, after they do one of 2 activities. One of the activities was writing a thank you note to someone that they were grateful for. And the person in the study was told that this thank you letter would actually be mailed to the person that they wrote it to. Or in a control condition, just describing the layout of their living room. So they're either doing a gratitude induction with this thank you note or just drawing their living room space. And then they reported on their mood again. So you can see here on this figure, it's broken into positive and negative mood, and you can see changes in mood. So what I want you to notice is gratitude is in blue here. That positive mood on the left increased from pre-activity to post, but in the control, it actually sort of dropped. And then in the negative mood side, that gratitude, that activity led to a reduction in negative mood, whereas the control really didn't change it. So in summary, what we're seeing is gratitude can promote positive mood and it can decrease negative mood, which, as we know, are important for maintaining happy and good well-being. And there are lots of ways that you can increase gratitude in your own life. Writing thank you notes is certainly one of them, but another intervention that I just briefly wanted to mention is the popular gratitude journal. And I have a picture of Oprah Winfrey here because she swears by it. And I feel personally that if Oprah Winfrey is doing something, we should all pay attention and consider doing it because she's such a successful, well-rounded person. And what you do in this gratitude journal is that you can list either every day or every week 1 to 3 things that you're grateful for in your own life. And so for those of you who have families, I highly recommend doing this, maybe just listing one thing at the beginning of your family dinner to start off dinner on the right foot. And these things that you list, they don't have to be large, big events. So just to share a couple of mine, when I think about what I'm grateful for, I think of my daughter, I think of my health, and I think of my job or my career. So you can list something that's specific that happened to you today, but also something that's more kind of chronic or ongoing that you are lucky to have in your life. So as I've done for the other 2 motions, I wanted to finish up with some data-driven suggestions. So one thing about gratitude is that in order for it to be felt and understood by others, it needs to be communicated. It's not enough that you feel gratitude, but you want to tell others that you're grateful. A simple thank you or saying that you're grateful for something that they did goes a long way. Similarly, seeing gratitude and not obligation. Sometimes when someone does something for you, it can be tempting to feel like, oh, now I owe them and I don't really want to. But really, I would say, think about the kind thing they've done for you. And then maybe it will feel easier to think about some way that you could repay them back if that's something you would like to do or can do. And again, take a moment each day to think about a time that you felt grateful or something you're grateful for. And that can just act as a short, quick, positive mood booster, negative mood reducer that I think can be really powerful if you do it somewhat consistently every day or every week. So hopefully today, just by giving you a few examples of this really fascinating category of positive emotions called self-transcendent emotions, I've highlighted the important role of positive emotions more broadly in staying positive and being happy and healthy and resilient. And I've highlighted a few emotions here: awe and compassion and gratitude, but there are many others: inspiration, love, forgiveness, emotions that I think are really critical to us connecting with other people and leading happy, healthy, and fulfilling lives. So I'm excited to see where this direction of positive psychology goes. And I think the addition of studying positive emotions, and in particular self-transcendent emotions, is going to be really fruitful for us to understand how we can all be happy and healthy. So with that, I wanted to thank you all for listening, and obviously co-authors, grant funders that make this research possible, in addition to my tirelessly working lab of research assistants. So thank you all, and I hope you've learned some tips and tricks that are data-driven that you can apply to your own lives.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for sharing your insights and experience. I really enjoyed when you shared the difference between just kind of focusing inward versus focusing outward, and also identifying when we can kind of experiencing these emotions in daily lives. Because when you mentioned awe, I kept thinking to my time visiting Banff, and I was literally like awe, but then you prompt me to think about, well, I'm pretty sure I kind of, feel that on the daily, especially when I go for a walk, same thing as you, kind of looking at the trees and the leaves. So thank you for sharing that. And yeah, you're right. Like you said, some of these emotions are more spoken about, especially now in social media. And I find that sometimes it can be a little tricky because some people go into kind of the quick fix. And I love that you shared, especially with the compassion fatigue, because some people might take it like, oh, so I need more compassion and I'm going to go and do that. So yeah, I really enjoyed everything you shared.
Thank you. And I do think it's important to note that these emotions aren't always easy. So you brought up a good point that these are challenging emotions sometimes to feel, and sometimes they can be a little positive and negative. But I think we're starting to really understand in positive psychology that it's not just 100% positive all the time, that there's a challenge to some of these experiences that are really meaningful, and incorporating that into our well-being so we don't create this too rosy picture of having to be happy all the time and not encountering suffering, not challenging your worldview, things like that. That's not really how we actually live in real life.
For sure. Yeah. It's never that straightforward. All right. We have quite a few questions that have come in from the audience, so I'll jump right in.
Sure.
The first one is, do you have any suggestions for short exercises to generate positive emotions that can be done during the workday?
Yes, I have many. So definitely the gratitude, sort of journaling, or even just thinking of something is quick, because I understand we all don't have a lot of time these days. Even though, at least in Toronto, maybe not where you all are, but the weather is a little cold, I do advocate trying to get outside, get in nature, even if it's a 10-minute walk, and really looking around, not just taking your phone out and checking your phone while you're walking, but looking around. That can be a way to promote awe. And then similarly with compassion, sort of being mindful and looking around for if you notice somebody who needs suffering or who needs compassion. Sometimes we're so caught up in what we're doing that we don't see those people, and they're giving us cues that they need some help. And we're just sort of missing them. And so being a little more aware kind of constantly or chronically, I think is something that you might realize, oh, this person who normally seems quite cheerful doesn't seem so cheerful today. Maybe I can go up to them later and ask them how they're doing. That might really mean something to them, and it might open a dialogue. So I think there's lots of different ways that we can promote these these emotions sort of quickly. But I do think at the same time, it takes a constant commitment. And so although you might not have to put in a lot of time, it is about changing your values to prioritize those emotions and that connection with people in a way that I would say sort of build that into how you're engaging with whatever you're doing on a daily level.
Sure. And I believe, just kind of listening to you share some of these examples, at the kind of base of that, it sounds like just being mindful, just trying to be in the moment will kind of to get you started, and then you kind of can go into those like with intention, like you said, the intention to be
exactly. And it's hard because sometimes, we get in these cycles where the stress makes us less likely to feel positive emotions, and then that makes the stress worse. And so these are just ways to try and kind of escape that cycle or that spiral, because that link is certainly there. And so if you can just sort of try to reduce the damaging effects of stress on your ability to experience these emotions, then you can open the window and the door to making yourself better, happier, feeling more meaning. And maybe that'll just start to get you off that path of least resistance that might be to be stressed all the time and overworked and overwhelmed.
For sure. And I feel like stress sometimes can really get us into that kind of tunnel vision, which sometimes when we talk about self-transcendence, you have to kind of step back and kind of look at the full picture.
Right.
But it is a practice with like we're saying, with going at it with an intention. It takes some time for sure. Yeah. Let me just read you the next question. Thank you for that. That was actually really helpful. Do you think that there can be negative outcomes from searching for positive moments and feelings too much?
Yes.
How can we find...
Oh, sorry, there's more. Okay. Continue.
There's a second part. Yeah. Just how can we find balance in our search for positivity?
Yes, I think that there's a lot in that question. But I think it does come back to this original point that I made at the end when we were chatting, which is that, if you are constantly looking to be happy all the time and ask yourself, am I happy enough? Am I enjoying myself enough? It can actually backfire. And there is research in psychology that suggests that people who are really always trying to be as happy as possible can actually feel more unhappy. And so I do think that there are dangers, certainly, to trying to sort of narrowly pursue this one goal of being happy all the time. I think it's maybe a little less so if you're trying to pursue meaning, because that sort of leads you to sometimes realize I can't always prioritize my temporary, momentary happiness because I have longer term goals. But certainly we can get into a dangerous place where we're just trying to be happy all the time. And so that's part of why I like these emotions, because they aren't just pure positive all the time. And they do deal with some of the complexities of social experience. Someone's suffering, someone does something nice for us. We see someone that really is awe-inspiring to us. These are complex situations that I think positive psychology has a lot to contribute, but I do see that there's an important nuance. I keep hearing this term, what is it? Toxic positivity.
Toxic positivity. Yeah.
And although I do have to say there's not a lot of research in psychology, this is more of like a social term, that phenomenon term that people use. I do think it speaks to a danger of overly focusing on being happy. And sometimes that can also lead to these sort of comparisons, either with yourself from a previous time or another person who seems happier. And so you don't feel good about yourself. So I agree. There's certainly a place for negativity. And I think the challenge is, can we draw some meaning from it? Can we learn from it so that it's not just a horrible thing that happened, a negative event, a stress that's always weighing us down, but we find ways to try and make it manageable, see the silver lining. Even just experiencing positive emotions in the context of negative can be really useful. So we certainly, especially after the last few years, have been dealing with lots of challenges. And I don't want to create this sense that you have to just be super happy all the time. And I think that would be impossible for most of us, myself included, to achieve. So yeah, certainly everything with moderation. And like I said, it's actually in the moments when you're feeling the most stress, if you can do a small thing to build some positive emotion, it might improve your resilience in that moment, or it might help undo some of the negativity of what you're experiencing. So it's that balance between, we all are obviously going to face negative experiences and challenges, but what is the positivity we can infuse even just a little bit into that situation? It doesn't have to overwhelm the negativity, but just a little bit, I think, would be helpful.
For sure. And I love that you brought up the whole kind of toxic positivity, and now even gratitude, toxic kind of gratitude. And I think it can have implications for both inward and outward, because sometimes people use positivity as like, oh, cheer up, and that doesn't really help with the compassion piece that you kind of talked about. Or inward, we evolve with all of these emotions. They all have their place in us. They all communicate something. So I think it's so important to allow them. But for sure, a lot of people can kind of take this message and go into kind of like, well, I want that, but I don't want this. And the thing with emotions is like, you can't kind of pick and choose. And usually what I've seen in my practice, when you try to kind of lower your experience or try to kind of shove down all the negative ones, you actually start to have trouble experiencing the positive ones. So yeah, we have to, I feel like, really be mindful of the intention here again. And what I was going to kind of add, maybe when you said, well, let's say you're stressed out during the day, and you're like, try to see how you can add some positive emotions in there. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, when you're stressed out, you're kind of like, again, like that tunnel vision, but maybe even kind of thinking about what is it that kind of gives me comfort and joy, so I can kind of go do that activity. And I'm sure those kind of more pleasant, or as I call them, comfortable emotions will kind of come, you will probably experiencing them.
Right. And they may not be as easy too, right? So it's tempting. I know, like when I would be commuting home on the train, I might just go on my phone, and then I end up doing things that weren't actually making me happy. They were making me more stressed, or leading to social comparisons where I was seeing other people having a great time and I just had a really hard work day. And so I have been, personally, I'll try to do something like call my sister or somebody that I feel a close connection with. And often that leads to some of those positive emotions, not just self-transcendent, but just other generally positive emotions. But it's effortful to do those things, or it's effortful to come home and then exercise or go for a walk to feel some sense of awe. So I think that can be the challenge. Is not only does stress narrow us, it also sort of makes us tired and not want to get up and do things. And those positive emotions that I talked about are really about getting out of your comfort zone a little bit and connecting with somebody else. And I think in the end, they are really meaningful, but they do require a little bit of like a push
for sure
yourself to do those. And so being mindful again about when you're feeling like you don't want to do anything but watch TV or like doom scroll on Twitter, and trying to sort of reduce your tendency to engage in those habits. If you know that for you, which is the case for me, they're not actually making you feel better after you do it. They're just something you feel sort of compelled to do for whatever reason that we have. So yeah, I agree. I think it's something where we do have to think about what we can do to build these moments in especially in more trying times, but it's certainly not about stuffing down negative emotions. And I agree 100% that those negative emotions are important signals. Like when we're sad, that tells other people we need support and compassion from them. If we hide that emotion, nobody knows we're suffering, then why would anyone help us? They'll probably just assume we're fine. So yeah, I think there's a place for negative emotions. It's just that they're really been the only place for emotions in psychology.
Oh,
and
for sure.
It's really nice to see. I'm starting to see the shift now. Maybe 5-10 years ago, I was like telling people about positive emotions. They're like, why do we care about these? We care about anger and fear and sadness. Now I think people are realizing that we do need to care. And then the question is, can we do that with like nuance between the positive and negative, and a balanced understanding of the place of both of them in our daily lives?
Absolutely. I love that last part, place of both of them. And I think, again, we go to that quick fix just because of the kind of all or nothing, black and white, but we want that flexibility for sure. And actually, I recently read the new Brené Brown book, The Atlas of the Heart, and she goes through all of the emotions and experiences people can go through. So if people are kind of interested in learning those, that's where I also kind of learn a little bit more about awe and wonder. I think she made it distinguished. All right. Just for the sake of time, I know I can talk about this forever. The next question is, what impacts what impacts can lowering your levels of inflammation have on health and longevity, sorry, and why is it such an important effect?
Right. So I do want to caution, we're working on follow-up studies right now, which we're really excited about, that are experimental. This is just a correlation. So we don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. But we know from a lot of science, actually, that's been done in the medical world as well as in psychology, that just like something like cortisol, which maybe you're more familiar with, that has a usefulness in the moment. We get stressed and we do want our body to respond to that acute stressor. You also don't want cortisol just hanging out in your body for long periods of time. And it's similar with these markers of inflammation. If you have a sickness or an infection, you want those inflammatory markers to come out in your body and be part of your normal acute response. But what unfortunately seems to be the case is that people are coming into, studies and doctors' offices with chronically elevated levels of inflammation. And these can come from our emotional and psychological experiences in part. High levels of stress, in particular, shame is one that seems to activate this inflammation response, low levels of positive emotions, depression. And these sort of psychological experiences are leading to this chronic inflammation that is bad over time for our bodies and is associated with things that can put us at risk for diseases that can reduce longevity. So I think the point here is that, the immune system is really complicated. These pro-inflammatory cytokines, or these markers of inflammation, are only one piece for sure. But we do know that there's a lot of things in our environment, both social and non-social, even food, that can contribute to inflammation that we need to be careful of. Because we don't want to be having these sort of inflammatory markers just hanging out in our body with no disease or injury to target. They're just sort of causing damage as they're floating around our bodies. And so in the sample that we were looking at was healthy young adults. You wouldn't expect to see high levels of inflammation. And so if we're seeing those markers, that's not really a good sign, because those effects compound as you get older. So by the time those students hit their 40s, 50s, 60s, they're actually going to be starting to see some of the consequences of having just high levels of inflammation in their body over time chronically. So yeah, there's a lot of different health consequences. It's not a good thing. So anything we can do to reduce that, eating better, exercising, but also being mindful psychologically of our environment and reducing stress, increasing positive experiences when we can, those are all going to be ways that you can combat having that chronic level of inflammation, if possible. So yeah, it can be a dangerous sort of long-term consequence to have these markers just hanging out in your body. And I think the goal will be, certainly there'll be lots of paths towards trying to rectify that, but does psychology, and I think it does, have something to contribute to that story.
And again, what the emotions that you mentioned and possible practices that can help with those emotions can be those things that we practice to lower those levels. And one other question is, are there any new studies or research taking place in the field, in your field of study? And any suggestions about where we can find more information?
Good question. So there's a lot happening in positive psychology generally. There's some good books that come out with some frequency. So authors like Dan Gilbert and Sonia Lubomirsky have sort of books that are written for a popular audience. So you don't have to feel like you have a PhD in psychology to read them, but you can get cutting edge research, at least a sense of what's happening in the research. So I certainly recommend that's a good place to start. Just maybe try to focus on books written by people who are actively engaged in research in the field. That would be my one. So important, because there's very many books out there. And you want to make sure the advice you're getting is based in data and sort of synthesized by someone whose job is to understand psychology experiments. But I think that's a great place to start. There's a lot of good centers also that are working on this kind of thing. So when I was a PhD student, I was part of a Greater Good Science Center, which is based out of UC Berkeley, that constantly has new articles coming out. They're tied to UC Berkeley, so they're pretty well the people who work there are pretty well versed in dealing with science-based research. And they have tests that you can take to see how empathic you are, how you can promote your own awe or gratitude. But their focus is really on trying to help people cultivate this sort of positive side, especially if they feel like they don't have a balance between positive and negative, and it's always negative. So there are centers like that I would say to check out if you want to know the most recent work. But there is a lot happening in positive psychology. It's a rapidly growing field, which I'm really excited about because I think it has been quite imbalanced for a long time, and now we're starting to really see that balance coming back, and it's leaking out into popular culture, right? With all of these books that you can read written for popular audiences, but even movies. So I recommend, if you're looking for a movie, Inside Out is a great movie. My advisor actually helped as the emotion consultant on that movie. So I'm very familiar with the research that went into it. It's entertaining, it's good for kids and adults, but it also is starting to sort of try to change the culture and mindset about emotions, even negative emotions, that they are useful and functional in certain ways. But it actually has a lot of nuggets of science in there. So if you're looking for something to watch with the whole family, that's another way. And you are getting some of the recent views on affective science and emotion, even though you're watching like an animated, fun, chill movie.
I love that movie. I use the movie. I constantly ask clients, have you seen that movie? And kind of using the concept to help them kind of understand their emotions. And the other thing that you mentioned, it's so, I mean, I love that you kind of gave us information on actual kind of centers that use latest or information online, sorry, that uses latest kind of research, because there can be a lot of just people kind of taking up or reading some stuff online and then kind of playing expert on the internet. So thank you for sharing those. And I guess we have just time for one last question. And actually mine, I wanted to ask that one is related to what you just shared, but are there any books that you love that you've read on the topic? I'd love to know, but I'm sure people also would love to kind of have some titles there.
Yeah, the two, I'm forgetting the title of it because it's been a little while, but maybe we can include it in like a little piece after, but the Dan Gilbert book, I think it's Stumbling on Happiness. I hope I'm getting that right.
I'm writing it down myself.
Okay, I hope it's the right name, but is a really nice one, partially because I actually think he's a wonderful writer in addition to being a very good academic. And sometimes it's hard to do, I can testify it's hard to do both. And so I think it's well written, but also just very informative book. So I think that would be like my top recommendation if you want to get involved or kind of increase your understanding. Now, I don't know if there's more recent ones I should recommend, because I feel like that one's a few years old, but at least for me, that was a really wonderful book. Marty Seligman, I'm not sure if he has a new book, Martin Seligman, I should say. He was actually really one of the fathers of the positive psychology movement. He studied learned helplessness. And so it's kind of an interesting twist that was the person who decided to push forward in psychology, this positive psychology movement. But he talked about how there were certain animals he started with this learned helplessness work with that didn't give up, that didn't become helpless. And what can we learn and understand from these really resilient animals? And so it kind of changed his whole research track. And now he has a center at University of Pennsylvania that focuses on virtues and meaning and positivity. I don't know if he has a new book. For some reason, I think he does, but at least even just going to his website that's part of University of Pennsylvania is a great place to start looking at just basic science. And also it has a nice component of values and thinking about values like curiosity, humility, gratitude is one of them. So things that, again, they're emotion based sometimes, but they're also deeper values that I think we can all try to reaffirm and think about for ourselves in building up in our lives. And how can we be more humble? How can we be more curious, more grateful? That kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think acting with our values will for sure help us, experience those emotions that you talked about today.
Yeah.
So on behalf of University of Toronto Mississauga, I'd like to thank you, Professor Stellar, for your presentation and responses to the questions from our audience.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm sorry I couldn't be virtually in person, or however you say it, virtually at the same time with everyone. But if you do want to contact me, you can always go to my website. It's jennifersteller.com, and my email's there. And you're always welcome to send other questions if you have them. And I'll do my best to respond in a timely manner. But hopefully it was informative and useful and interesting, and you've got some tidbits you can apply to your own lives.
Thank you. I really enjoy that. I for sure use some of that. Everyone who registered for today's event will receive links to the recordings of the entire series once it has concluded in early March. You may also review this webinar in particular at any time on the UTM Alumni YouTube channel. If you enjoyed today's webinar, we hope that you will be able to attend the upcoming sessions in the wellness series over the coming weeks. Be sure to check out other upcoming events listings and more on the UTM Alumni page, which will be shared with you. You will see a link for more information pop up in the chat box below. Thank you again for joining us. We look forward to hosting you again at another U of T Mississauga Alumni online event.